and adhere the glass to them as we work. And then this big orange circle right here, this is our reheating chamber. And that is going to be where most of the action is taking place. We're going to be constantly putting glass back in there to heat it back up so it's a nice workable temperature the entire time. I'm also going to introduce you to our artists. Our gaffer today, or the person in charge of this, is Jake, and his assistant will be Sandy. All right, without further ado, it looks like they're very excited to get started. So the first step in this process is going to be to get a gather of glass out of that furnace. And so a gather of glass consists of sticking the rod into the furnace right until it touches the molten glass, and then spinning it around 2 or 3 times just to kind of get all that glass right up and onto the pipe. So that glass right now has about the consistency of honey when it's in the pot. And as he's turning it in the air right now, it's actually cooling down into more of a stiffer material. So as we work, we continuously go from really hot liquidy glass right down into the solid glass. Glass is a non-Newtonian fluid, so it's kind of always in that flux state. And the thing with gathering is you can only get so much at once. So you saw he had just a little bit of glass and he stuck it in there, gathered up a little bit more. And so that second gather about doubles the amount of glass that he has. And because I said that the glass inside of our pot is completely clear, we're gonna add some color onto it. And the way that he's adding color onto this glass right now is with frit. So frit is just kind of crunched up glass. So the actual crunched up bits are completely colored. And so you add that to the molten glass. You tap the molten glass down on it. It heats up, sticks to the actual gather. And then as he puts it in the reheating chamber, it melts in. And there's a lot of different ways to color glass itself. Using this frit form, he's actually going to have to go in and dip into that frit multiple times because the chunks are really little, so it doesn't quite cover the entire surface all at once. And I do believe right now he's using a nice blue color. And so as we go through this, it's not going to look like the blue that it will be later because of the heat of the glass. I'm going to go ahead and make sure that that's a nice full blue coverage. And so the piece he's actually making right now is going to be that caterpillar on top of the mushroom that Alice sees right after she's gone down the rabbit hole. She has made the potion to make her super teeny tiny, goes into the door, and she's in this beautiful forest. And one of the first beings she sees in the rabbit hole or in Wonderland is this big caterpillar who's giving her some great advice as to how to navigate this new world she finds herself in. And what he's working on right now is actually going to be the body of that caterpillar itself. And the pipe he's working on right now is it's not hollow, so it's not a blowpipe. So this section, there's going to be no blowing involved. So this is going to be a solid caterpillar. So you're going to be seeing a lot of rolling and shaping and not a lot of inflating right now. The Great Artiscape is a great time for us to practice our actual sculpting skills to make things that aren't functional works. Like a lot of glass you see, like all the glass in your home, I assume is functional. So you see he's using that Marver table, that stainless steel table, to kind of draw out that glass to make it nice and long like the caterpillar's body. You're also seeing the difference in color So every time he goes back into that reheating chamber, you can see that all of that glass turns a nice bright orange color. And then as he's using that marver, it's going back into that blue. That's because the steel is actually sucking all that heat right out of the glass. You can also see that it's going from being kind of wiggly wobbly when it comes out of there when it's super hot to being nice and stiff afterwards. And that once again is because glass is in flux as we're working on it. So as it cools down, it's going to get a lot stiffer than it is when it's right out of that reheating chamber, or especially right out of that furnace. So he's going in with his jacks to create these constriction points of that caterpillar shape. He's just gently squeezing with that metal tool, allowing it to kind of form the ridges for him. He's not squeezing down super hard. He's just gently guiding those ridges into place. And this last one here that's nearest to the pipe head is going to be the smallest constriction point, because that's where the caterpillar will actually break free from the pipe. And you can see when he's in there, he's pulling out a little bit. So the pipe and that little mark he just made, the tiniest constriction point, is actually outside of the reheating chamber so that it doesn't get too hot. Because that tiny little point, if it gets super hot, is going to make the entire caterpillar just kind of wiggle around a little bit too much. He's not going to have as much control over it. And you can see without even really touching anything, he's starting to make the shape of the caterpillar all curled up there. Will allow everything to stay a nice smooth shape as he's moving it around. Also with that little bit of curve, you see he let it hang down first over top of it, and then he's working on the back end of this caterpillar. So it's important when you're sculpting something to go ahead and sculpt the part that's closest to the actual rod first. Because if you're not sculpting the thing that's closest to the rod, you're going to have to go back, heat everything back up that you've just worked on that's farther out. And there's a good chance of distortion. So when you're working in a big sculptural kind of area, you're going to start at the back end so you can let that cool and rest as you work on things farther up to the end of the glass. You can also see that process here as when he's going into that reheating chamber and coming back out, you're going to see less and less orange as he finalizes this shape. And now that the glass is a little cooler, I can see that he has a stripe of purple as well on the caterpillar. I couldn't quite see that when it was all orange, but as it cools down, you can see more and more colors. And so before we started, we actually pulled some stringers of black glass. He's going to use this hot torch right now. It gets to about 3,000 degrees. And with that, he can actually use this rod of glass, kind of like a crayon, to draw onto his sculpture. So you can see he's heating that up, making sure the end is really hot so that it's nice and gooey. But he still has the back end really cool so his hands don't hurt, nothing's hot there. With a tiny torch like this, you can really focus the heat and focus where you're going to put everything that you want. And it looks like right now he's making the eyes for this caterpillar, so he can see Alice as she walks in this forest. So there we are. So now he can see. And it looks like we're going to do one more thing to his face. You can see as we're doing this process, Sandy is taking the caterpillar in and giving it what are called flashes of heat. So you don't want the caterpillar to be moving around as you're drawing on him, but you do want to be able to keep that heat into the piece. So if he were to just come out and try and do all of this drawing while just all at once, there's a good chance that the piece could get too cold and it could actually crack off. So those flashes allow it just to remain hot enough that it's not stressed out, but not hot enough for it to start moving again. Oh, I see what they are. Those are the little antennae for the caterpillar. So now not only can he see Alice, he can also feel her coming. And just with a few tiny little bits of added black glass, that caterpillar really comes to life. So we can feel this whole environment very easily. And now he's worked on as much as he can, or as much as he wants to, of this caterpillar as it is. So Sandy's actually going to start creating what's called a punty. So that's going to be like a glue bit for transferring this piece over to a different rod. It's a tiny little attachment. You can see right now they're going in and out of these holes simultaneously. They're talking really well with each other, and they're just making sure the temperature is perfect. They're making sure that that temperature is perfect for when they break it off. So if it's too hot or too cold, the punning process can get a little tricky. And a little bit of water adds what's called thermal shock. They're making sure it's comfortable when it breaks off. And just that little bit of stress allows that caterpillar to break completely free of that larger punny and onto this smaller one.
Oh, sorry, Sandy, I didn't think about that.
I'm gonna grab the board. Nope.
Okay.
And the way they actually transfer that, they just change the axis of the caterpillar itself so that Jake can more easily work on the back half of it. And this torch is called a fluffy torch. So it's going to allow him to spot heat the end of the caterpillar that he needs to work on. And glass really has a memory for heat. So wherever a torch hits it, before it goes back into that reheating chamber, it's going to remember that it was hotter there. So it's actually going to just soak in that heat right there where that torch was hitting it.
That should be good, Sandy. You can slowly build the heat up on that too.
And you could see a little bit when it came out of that reheating chamber that that end, right where that torch is hitting it, is the hottest spot. You could see that it was glowing orange, a lot brighter than the rest of the piece was. Give that another heat soak. Make sure that everything is a nice happy temperature. And then you can go in and kind of round up that kind of bottom end or the tail end of this caterpillar. Another thing to remember too is that glass, different colors of glass actually heat up faster than other colors. So when he comes out of that reheating chamber, you can kind of see that the face of the caterpillar is glowing red. That's because it's a black glass, and black tends to soak in heat a lot faster than other colors. It's just kind of like if you have a white car versus a black car in the summer. The black car is going to heat up faster than the white car just because it soaks in that light and that heat a lot faster. He's just making absolutely sure that that tail end is going to be malleable enough for him to do what he wants to do with it. Because as soon as you touch it with one of those steel tools, it's going to cool down really fast. So you really want to make sure there's a lot of heat in your glass before you start messing around with it. Use his tweezers, plucked it up a little bit. And with those done, he's about to break that off. So it's just a nice little tip, but it is sharp right there. So going back into the reheating chamber, that'll melt everything in. It's really nice when you are doing like cartoonish style sculpting, because glass really just wants to be round. It doesn't like to have rigid edges. As soon as it gets hot, it just wants to round back up on itself. You can see the caterpillar is just kind of moving around. He's going to give it a little personality here. And you can see him really looking at it and thinking about it. He's just not moving this caterpillar around without any purpose. He's actually thinking about what the mushroom is going to look like underneath of it and how it's going to actually sit on the mushroom and what the finished piece is going to look like. All right, so it looks like that caterpillar right there. That's a cute little guy. He's done and he's ready to wait for his mushroom home to be built. So Zane is going to flash him down or get him to a nice comfortable temperature and then put him into what is called a garage. So the garage is just kind of a waiting area for the glass. And once it goes into the garage, it can stay there for as long as it needs to before it's ready to get transferred over to a separate piece. And as he's doing this, Jake is also starting a blow collar so that he can pick up a little bit of bar. So he's going to start the mushroom section now. He's doing some prep work there. He actually blew through the end of the pipe and split open a bubble, so it's just glass on the outside of the pipe, not on top of where the actual hole is. So when you're working with bar, you want to make sure that it has a nice solid connection to the pipe head so that you can blow it all out nice and evenly. And his bar is actually in the garage right here. So it's been heating up in there for about an hour. He's going to make sure that it's nice, comfortable temperature before he takes it back to that reheating chamber. Because if it's too cold, it can get stressed out once again. And once it goes into the reheating chamber, that sudden increase in heat could actually cause a lot of stress in that color bar and cause it to crack or explode. So it's a nice slow heat before he then is now in the reheating chamber and heating that up until it's malleable. And the caterpillar is going to rest into his new home.
We not have the ball available? Flash is dry.
So working that heat into that color bar is actually going to take a little bit of time because it is going from around 900 degrees up to that molten kind of temperature of 2000 degrees for this. The glass inside of our furnace, where you saw that it's that nice honey-like liquid structure, is around 2150 degrees. So you can see it now has that nice bright orange glow. And he's going to work it down into kind of a Q-tip shape so that he can gather glass over top of this color bar. So the reason that he's putting the color bar in first is that so he can gather a whole bunch of clear glass over top of it. And when you blow through that color bar, it's going to give the illusion that the entire piece is made of colored glass. Because the way that the optics of glass work, once you blow through this color bar, it just stretches out and the glass just kind of naturally wraps the whole color around the outside of it. That's why if you look at a lot of pieces inside of our actual museum that look like they're big, solid colored items, they're probably made with color bar. One, because just having a tank full of color is very expensive. Two, it kind of limits what you can do. So you'd only be able to work with one color in your furnace tank at a time, as opposed to us here who have our clear furnace and then the availability of all this bar stock that we can change the colors whenever we want. So there he has his nice first actual gather onto this pipe over top of that bar stock. And you're going to start to shape this up. Make sure it's a nice Q-tip shape once again before he starts blowing into it. The Q-tip shape is very important when blowing glass. It's the best starter structure for anything that you want to blow. It allows your bubble to be nice and even. And it also allows you to have a little bit more glass on the bottom of your piece. Usually when you're blowing glass, the bottom of the piece that you start with on this pipe is going to be the bottom of your actual piece in the end. And you want to make sure that the bottom is a little bit heavier so it doesn't fall over when you put it somewhere. It's like if you're thinking about the vase you have at home. You don't want it to be super light on the bottom because then when you put your flowers into it, it's going to fall over. And then you're no longer going to have a vase and your flower is going to be very sad. So he's using that block to shape it up. The block is actually just a solid block of wood that has that Q-tip shape kind of carved onto the inside. And that's been soaked in water since we got them. And that allows them not to burn as he shapes the glass with them. And just using a little bit of gravity here, he's allowing the bubble to stretch out. And with a newspaper, he can shape it up a little bit more. So a newspaper is actually one of the best tools that we have. It's the closest thing we can get to shaping the glass with our bare hands. So you're actually going to put light pressure on either side of that newspaper, and you're actually able to shape the glass just with slight hand pressure. And once again, if you guys are watching from home, you can feel free to ask questions. I really love answering questions from everyone. On that marver, there's a little bit of white frit. So he's going to have tiny little dots on the top of his mushroom here. And once again, that color coming from room temperature all the way up to a nice movable temperature does take a little bit of time. And you can see that all this color work, all this prep work for the making of the piece actually takes up a lot more time than blowing the piece out. You want to make sure that your colors are exactly how you want them before you start your piece. Going to shape his bubble up again, once again getting it back into that kind of Q-tip shape so that when he starts to blow it out, it will be a nice shape. So he's going to add a little bit of air there, just puffing into the end of that pipe, inflating it a little bit. The newspaper is also a good way to cool your glass down. So whenever he's touching the newspaper to the glass, he's actually going to cool down the part that he is touching. Because it is, once again, it's soaked in water. So that water is going to cool that glass down, not as fast as our stainless steel marver or any of our tools, but it's going to cool it down and kind of chill that spot. And once again, the glass has a memory of where heat is and where it isn't. So as he touches it, he can really kind of control where that bubble's going to go. Because the bubble really wants to just move through the easiest place that it can. So it's going to want to move through the hottest part. So you can see that he's choosing to cool down the sides just a little bit, but he's mostly focused on that bottom area, making sure that that's a little bit cooler, and also he's dragging some of that glass up to the tip, making it thicker there, so the glass, once again, won't super want to move there. It's also a nice structure for gathering over and getting some more glass. You don't want to have any little pockets or dimples in your glass when you go back into the furnace, because glass isn't like water. It's not going to just flow everywhere. It's going to get air bubbles trapped in it if there's any sort of imperfections in the face of your glass. But if you do want bubbles or something, like if you're making a paperweight, you want to put a whole bunch of little air pockets into your glass, so you're going to have a whole bunch of little dimples that glass can trap those air bubbles into. So he's going to let it cool down before he goes in for another gather. If your glass is too hot when it goes into the furnace, it could heat up even more, and you can kind of lose your shape as you go. So you want it to be just cool enough that it's going to have a nice firm structure underneath. Because currently that glass is like the honey dipper that you put into a pot of honey. So it's going to have enough structure to kind of wind all that glass up onto it. And there we go. We have another gather, so that's about a third more glass than he had before. And you can see that solid core of color on the inside there, all surrounded by that hot molten glass. So right now, using that block is both going to shape it up and cool it down. Before he blows into it again, he wants to make sure that the inside temperature and that outside glass are the same temperature. So he's going to cool it down some more and then slowly start to work this heat into the core so that everything can expand at the same rate. Glass blowing is both a lot about knowing how to use your tools, knowing how to blow the glass, but it's also a lot about looking at your piece and knowing what temperature the glass is at just by looking at it, because we can't really test it. We can't put a thermometer on it and just see how hot it is. So you have to know how hot it is by the colors and by the movement of the glass. And a reason that we don't wear gloves in the hot shop, there's a lot of people that usually ask, why is nobody wearing gloves here? Like, it's super hot. Don't your hands like burn? One, our stainless steel pipes are actually very poor conductors of heat. So the heat's not going to travel up to where Jake's hand is right now. It's actually going to stop about a foot before. And that's going to tell you how hot the glass actually is. Because once it's in that reheating chamber, everything just kind of looks orange. So he's cooling that tip down on the marver. And right now he has a blow hose in. So even if you don't see that pipe go up to his mouth, he actually has it inside of his mask right now. He has a little hose with an end tip that he's blowing into. And he's able to inflate the glass that way. Blow hoses are usually used for solo glass blowers, but with the times that we're in right now, we just can't share mouthpieces. So we can still assist each other and help make these wonderful large sculptures and large works, but we're just doing all the blowing ourselves. And yeah, the wooden paddle also really helps to shield the heat from his arm, because all of that heat is radiating out. You can see that bright orange. That means that it's really super hot. And if you have that paddle right there, it's going to block most of the heat from your hands. So you can go in and get that constriction line. So he's made a really teeny tiny line right near the head of the pipe, so that later he can break this piece off of the blowpipe. And so earlier I said that all of the color work and everything is what takes the most amount of time. And you can really see that here. He took about 2 heats, and it looks like this piece is almost, or it is inflated as much as he needs it to be. So it is called glass blowing, but the blowing part really is only about 25% of the time that we're working. It's mostly just tool shaping, using gravity, and lots of color.
We do have a question.
Yes?
They want to know what color is the mushroom.
I believe the mushroom is red.
Christmas red.
It's Christmas red. So it's going to be a nice bright red. with those little white dots on it. So as I was saying before with gravity, so we lifted it up, allowed the heat to just kind of back in that, so it backed in that mushroom top. And so that you have the cap area, that dome bowl. And I do believe he also used his blow hose to suck in just a little bit of air just to help it come back in. And so there's the mushroom cap.
Yeah, take a good flash and get the tungsten ready.
And so right now they're going to be doing this very interesting maneuver. So he has a drill and a little rod, and he's going to heat up the end of that rod and actually drill a tiny little hole directly into the glass. This is going to allow the glass to have an area for air to escape once he attaches the caterpillar to the top and the stem to the bottom. Because if you don't have a spot for the air to escape, there's a chance that the glass will get really stressed out in the actual annealing process, the process where it cools down that we'll get to a little bit later. But you just want to make sure that it has enough of a hole in it so that air can just escape.
Right, Sandy, babysit that, keep that nice and warm, not too crazy. What's that?
So Sandy's going to keep the pipes are poor conductors of heat, but once you go into a 2,150 degree furnace, they get a little hot. So it's really nice that we have these water coolers right next to us so we can just cool the pipe down and make sure we can be really comfortable while we're holding the pipes. Because you also want to have it nice and cool so you can grab down closer to where the glass actually is. Because even though we're probably not working with superbly heavy glass, it'll feel a lot heavier the farther back you're holding it, because you have just the weight of the actual pipe, which the weight of his pipe right now is probably only like 5 or 10 pounds. It's not super heavy, but once you have a whole bunch of molten glass on the end, it feels a lot heavier. And so he's using another type of color right now. So I think we've kind of hit on all the ways that you can color glass with other glass. He's using a powder. So that is like the frit, but it just crushed up a lot more. So it's just kind of a fine dust that he's coating his mushroom stem with. And he is using a nice like beige color, so it will look like a normal mushroom stem. And once again, with a color like this, you have to coat it quite a few times for it to get a nice full coverage. And a reason that he wouldn't use bar to do this, because he wants full coverage, so why isn't he using bar? So he's going to use a powder because he wants it to be thicker, because this is going to hold up everything else. So it needs to be nice and thick, or else the entire piece could just wobble and fall over. We just want it to be nice and heavy. Yeah, see, he keeps going back in there, taking some nice flashes. So just a nice dose of heat so that the entire thing is nice and comfortable the entire time. Oh, and he's gonna show you what the inside of that cap looks like. So you can see it's kind of like a bowl right now, and it has those nice spots on the outside. And as I said before, the colors of the glass aren't gonna come through until it hits around 200 degrees, which we're not gonna see today. The colors of the glass are just so hot right now that they show up completely differently. So he's inflated that stem just a little bit. He's puffing it out. He's still paying attention to exactly where the bubble is, how thick it's going to be, making sure that it's going to be able to structurally support this mushroom. Which is another thing that you really have to think about when you're working on sculptures with bits and pieces. You're going to have to think about how everything's going to fit together and also how it's going to be able to stand up. So really when we're doing work like this is called hot sculpting. So when you're doing hot sculpting, you're really thinking about like 2 or 3 different things all at once. And you have to continuously plan for the next step while also thinking about what you just did, how everything's gonna fit into place. And you can see he just grabbed another gather of glass, which is going to allow him to have a little bit more weight here. So he's thinking about the weight of that caterpillar he made. He's thinking about the weight of the cap that he just made and how much weight it's going to need to be supported by this stem. You can also see him dragging that clear glass right down to the end. Yeah, so it's just a little bit of excess glass there, that clear. And with those jacks, he can cut a constriction line just like he did to break the pieces off. He can cut that off and then using diamond shears, just trim that excess right away. So you won't see any clear in this piece. It's just gonna be that nice beige color. You can also see them over there messing with these hooks in the doors. So our reheating chambers here at the Toledo Museum of Art actually open and close depending on what size we're working on. So we can make really big things, and we can also make really tiny things in the same reheating chamber without worrying about all of that heat coming directly on us all at once. Because if those were open all the way all the time, it would be very, very hot in here. Going back in with the torch, he's going to spot heat where he's going to want that constriction line to go. Because even this structural part is going to have to be broken free from this blowpipe. And the jack line is one of the most basic and most important things in glass blowing. So if you don't have your jack line in exactly when you need it, then you're probably not going to be able to keep your piece. Because if you don't have a jack line in, you're not going to be able to transfer it over to anything else. You're not going to be able to break it off to... You're not going to be able to break anything off onto just the knockoff table or just into the annealer either. So that's why every time you see a demonstration, you always hear about the jack line and its importance. And it's gotten that name because the tool he's using is called the jacks. It's one of the most versatile tools that we have. You can use the blades to open things up, to shape the sides, and you also have, or to make those constriction points. And you also have that back strap area that's right above his hands right now that can be used to flatten surfaces and also to balance things out.
Plug it, or what are you gonna, I'm gonna water it and then I'll have you tap it.
So you see they're chit-chatting about how exactly they're going to do this transfer. You don't want to be talking about how you're going to do a transfer as you're doing the transfer. You definitely want to make sure you know how this is going to end before you bring over the bit. So right now what they're doing is they're making sure that everything is the correct temperature for this transfer. They're getting heat in all the right places. Jake's making sure he's very happy with the stem.
Just gonna open this up
Communication is very important in the hot shop. You definitely want to talk to your assistant about what you're doing, what you expect them to do, and even talk about steps, 2 or 3 steps in the future, just so that you're all on the same page. It's really nice though, because we've all been working here for a while, so we all know
one more twist to open and breathe.
And glass blowing is also just kind of like a dance. So it is possible that even if if there's 2 glass blowers that have been working for a really long time and they both know the shape that you're making, they both know the steps of what you're making, you don't really need to talk. You don't need to know the same language to work together. You're gonna know exactly what they're gonna need right as they need it and be able to bring it to them. But we don't really do giant sculptures every day, so it is nice to talk.
Just give it a good, decent flash right before you bring it.
Getting that heat nice and ready.
All right, Sandy.
Boosting heat in that stem, boosting heat in that cap in the reheating chamber over there. Getting ready to merge them together.
Bring your end a little bit lower with your back end.
So I'm going to snap the cap off of that pipe and onto the pipe where the stem is. With the tap, that pipe breaks right off, and now we have a mushroom that's going to very quickly go into the heat. Just so that both the stem and the mushroom cap are going to get to the same temperature, so they're all happy and coexisting with each other. But that was a very beautiful transfer, very seamless. He's making sure everything's lined up as he wants it, because right now that stem part, just the top of the stem is nice and hot, and just the bottom of that cap is nice and hot, so it can wiggle right at that connection point right now. So he does have a tiny frame of window to shape everything up as he wants it.
Take a flash and focus the heat on that top. On the top? Yeah.
We have another comment. might have to read it out loud. Looks like a mushroom perfect for Mario, too.
Oh, so somebody just said that it looks like a mushroom perfect for Mario.
Did my job.
It does. Are you feeling powered up?
I am. I am. Alright, give it a good flash and bring it back.
Yeah, it is very nice mushroom. It's very nice. So we just saw him, he just dipped his hand into the water actually right before he grabbed those tiny little tweezers to pull open this top. So a lot of the time when you know that you're going to go into something that's going to be really hot, radiate a lot of heat, you're going to dip your hand into that water just to counteract the effects for a couple of seconds. Yeah, a lot of the time when I'm blowing glass, I get asked like if our hands do get hot. And they do, especially when you first start blowing glass. You're very sensitive to how hot the glass is all the time. But after you've been doing it for a while, you're just kind of used to the knowledge that yes, this is going to feel really hot, but also you're going to know that it's not me. He only wants the caterpillar to be the bug that infests the mushroom.
That's good.
So you see with those jacks, he's slowly closing down that hole.
Just one more and I'll open it.
And my favorite glass blowing term, that little flower kind of shape that he pulled out of the top of the mushroom, is called a floret. So it's basically just a handle that looks like a flower and will get chopped off later. You can really see that heat right in that floret area. It's that nice spot heat, and they've closed it down with those diamond shears. They can just cut that right on off. There we go. So now it's a closed off mushroom.
Actually, I got this. If you want to grab that, move it to the hot side. Sure, get it ready and then bring this.
So right now we have a flurry of excitement as we're getting ready to actually attach that caterpillar onto the mushroom. And so with that hot torch right now, what he just did was to smooth out those edges. So whenever you cut glass, it's going to be sharp. It's like cutting anything else. It's also a little bit of breaking glass off, and broken glass is always sharp. So you want to add heat to round it back out again. And so because he's been focusing really on the top of that mushroom, he's just giving that stem some love. The stem's also a little bit thicker, so it's going to hold heat in for longer, but it's also going to eventually get cold because it needs to have a nice soak. So using that fluffy torch is going to allow that heat just to soak into that stem and make it a nice, happy, comfortable temperature.
Alright, let's get Sandy. Thank you.
You're going to make sure that cap's as beautiful as it can possibly be. Nice and round.
Alright, you can go ahead and get that ready, put it right in the flame, and then take it for a couple flashes. And then we'll bring it over. Okay.
So now we're going to start preparing that caterpillar from the beginning to be transferred onto this mushroom, onto his new home. He's been renting time in our garage for a little bit. So just like when he got the bar out of this garage area, Sandy's going to have to work heat back into that caterpillar, because once it was in the garage, it was nice, it was solid, and it was just at the correct temperature, around 800, 900 degrees, where glass is solid, firm, not going to move around, but it's also not cooling down too fast that it's going to crack. But now he has to move it up into a nice movable area so that it can wiggle around, so it can break free of this punny rod a little easier. So he's going to do those quick flashes once again. You're going to see a nice in and out motion. Getting them nice and warm on this cold January day. You can also see Jake is heating up. He's heating up that top so that it can be attached a lot easier. Because hot glass only likes to stick to hot glass. So it has to be nice and toasty, or else the caterpillar is not going to want to stay. So now you can see there's a little bit of red in the caterpillar and a little bit of red on the edges, right where that punny connects to the caterpillar. And a little tap, and it breaks right off. Yay! And once again, we got to make sure those are a nice, even temperature. So he's going to make it a nice, comfortable temperature for both parts of that, and then start to flash it down. He also has that sharp little bit, so he's going to make sure that that's nice and soft. Because if somebody wants to take this home, we don't want it to hurt you at all. We want to make sure it's a nice, smooth caterpillar. So yeah, as I said, if anybody wants to take this home, every piece that we're making at the Great Artiscape actually is for sale. And we love making all these things. We'd love to know that it went to a good home, that somebody looks at it and loves it. Oh, so he's going to show you a little bit up close what this caterpillar looks like on this mushroom. He looks very pleased. And now we're going to start flashing this down so we can go into the annealer nice and safe. If I was Alice, I definitely would not be afraid of this caterpillar. I now see why she went directly up to a giant caterpillar on a giant mushroom. Once again, that fluffy torch is just making sure that the entire piece is a nice, safe temperature. Because the caterpillar is a little bit thinner than everything else, he's focused that heat just on the mushroom itself, making sure it's nice and comfortable. And Sandy's also going to gear up to put this into a 900-degree annealing oven. So you see he's kind of dusting his gloves with some heat, because if the gloves are too cold, they can actually shock the glass. So he's ready over there. And once again, we're just going to use So to break off a piece this big, we didn't need all day, so we've used up a lot of our water. So he's gonna keep that nice and toasty as we prepare to knock this off. So water enacts thermal shock, which just is stress in the glass. So then when there's a vibration, it can break off very easily. And sometimes glass is a little bit stubborn. So he's just gonna go in, do some last minute tweaks just to make sure that everything will come off easily and in one piece. So it looks like the mushroom itself might be trapped onto the pipe, which is one of the difficulties of working with an opaque color. You can't really see where the actual pipeline is. So he's going to heat that up and put another construction point in just so that we can knock this mushroom safely off of this blowpipe. So using both the fluffy torch and that hot torch just to cut a line of heat basically through this mushroom. See, very. Alrighty, so currently where you saw that caterpillar go into is going to be this box right here. So this is called an annealing oven. So what annealing is a very slow cool down process. So it's going to go from around 900 to 920 degrees down to room temperature over the process of about like 12 to 24 hours. So it's going to cool down super slow. The reason that it takes about 12 to 24 hours is because the glass, if it cools down too fast, gets really stressed out and will actually fracture and break apart. So it cools down, relieves the stress, and then once it's at room temperature, we can just take it right out of here and put it into our one of our gallery, cafe galleries, where it will be for purchase. Another thing about annealing is that the bigger something the thicker something is, the longer that it will take for it to anneal. So if you do come into our galleries, we have a cast dress from Katie Lamont, and that took around 6 months to actually fully anneal. And the reason that it took 6 months is that it's around 2 to 3 inches thick, whereas everything that we're making today, the maximum thickness we have is about 1/2 inch of thickness throughout everything. So even though it feels really heavy, it's thin all the way through, so we can anneal really fast. And so that's going to be everything for this demonstration. We are going to start another demonstration in about an hour, which will be 4 o'clock. Be sure to tune into that one as well. I do believe that Steve will be making an owl, if I am not mistaken. So that'll be super fun. Can't wait to see you guys there.